Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com.
With e-commerce off the charts, many small and growing warehouses are asking, how can I get ahead when my warehouse is barely keeping up? The answer is future-ready warehouse tech from Zebra Technologies. Warehouses can simplify and upgrade all processes, from automated inventory management to hands-free picking, with Zebra's tailored, scalable mobile solutions. They're simple and intuitive. There's never been a better time to upgrade for success with Zebra. How can your warehouse get ahead? The answer's in black and white. Get the answers at zebra.com/theanswer. That's zebra.com/theanswer. Fulfillment demand continues to skyrocket and outpace available labor. To keep up, warehouse operators are turning to flexible fulfillment solutions like 6 River Systems. Utilizing 6 River Systems' award-winning combination of collaborative robots, artificial intelligence, and operational expertise will make your associates and wall-to-wall fulfillment workflow more efficient. No new infrastructure, no change to warehouse layout, easy to deploy and scale, easy to train and retain associates, all at half the cost of traditional automation. Want to take your fulfillment operation to the next level? Go to www.6river.com to learn more. That's www.6river.com to learn more.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. On today's episode, I am going to be joined by Andrew Benzinger. He is a business development manager over at AutoStore, and he's going to tell us a little bit about AutoStore, give us a little brief overview, and talk to us really about what the concept of space redefined is by AutoStore's definition. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about space utilization, micro-fulfillment, and we're going to get into how micro-fulfillment is kind of advancing the way we look at grocery and how it's also helping in the retail and fulfillment model. So, Andrew, welcome to the show. How are you?
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. I certainly appreciate it. Glad to be a part of it.
Yeah, happy to have you on and talk to you about AutoStore and obviously this concept of micro-fulfillment as well. We've had a couple people on to talk about micro-fulfillment in the past. One company based in India, but really they're focusing on like the actual structure of micro-fulfillment. So it'd be interesting to hear from the AutoStore solution side about how you can help people accomplish micro-fulfillment. So why don't you give us a little brief overview of what AutoStore is?
Sure. So AutoStore is a robotics company. We're the manufacturer over in Norway and Poland of a robotic solution that is cube-based, where the robots drive on the top of the grid, and they enable a couple of things that grocers and retailers are really focused on right now, really trying to get as much productivity out of the team in the operation as possible, as well as trying to get as close to their customer as possible, still remaining profitable. So just a part of the challenge associated with getting closer to your customer is while you have offsetting logistics gains from fewer or shorter distance or miles traveled, you then have a rising rent. And then those kinds of offsetting equations make for the value of micro-fulfillment. And AutoStore enables, in nearly every case, at least a 75% space reduction of storage and operation. So, 10,000 square foot facility really feels like a 30 or 40 or 50,000 square foot facility because of how dense we store the product in our cube.
Right.
So at a high level, that's AutoStore.
Okay, great. And, one of I think the concept, from your website, it says it's space redefined, right? So when you look at space redefined, you're talking about, how you just mentioned, taking 10,000 square feet and making it more like 30,000, 40,000 square feet. So how would you say, I guess, what is the quintessential redefining of space for AutoStore? Like what's the right fit for that kind of micro-fulfillment model?
Well, I think, in an old school warehouse, which is kind of what automation was really born out of, was really, we're growing as a company. We like our warehouse. We want to stay where we can, but we're busting out the seams. And that was kind of the AutoStore story and how we started ourselves.
Right.
So for, 24 years, we've been helping companies stay in their warehouses, get closer to their customers, and do the same operations or higher volume of throughput per facility in a smaller footprint. So that's kind of what our core business is. But when those principles really have transferred extremely well to micro-fulfillment and ultimately what we're calling space redefined. And, it takes a chapter out of the Warby Parker and Bonobo's playbook where as a retailer, as a grocer, you have to have a strategy of, how do you want to address the market? What are you going to offer to your customers or to the neighborhood that you're working in and operating in? And we look at that value proposition that the grocer has to the customer, and we help them fulfill their brand promise by saying we're going to have an experience, or we're going to have a more profitable operation, meaning that we can have more products, more SKUs on the floor because we've got the right supply chain, we've got the right inventory, we've got the right product in the right spot at all times. And partly what by truly space redefined means is we can have, a larger sales floor by having a really small back room that can be supported by AutoStore. So the same logic I've shared earlier applies universally to say that as, a 2,000 square foot back room or 1,000 square foot back room can feel 4 times larger than it is. So that means that you don't have to have 2 facings of a product on a shelf. You can have one, which means you could have more product. Or alternatively, like Bonobos and Warby Parker, you can have an experience, much like an Apple store,
right,
where people don't go there to shop, they go there to experience the brand. And those are some of the things that we've been, starting to help companies over the last 5 years globally of how to redefine their brand, redefine their space, and do so in a really economical way. And over time, as that's evolved, it's been around the conversation of how do I enable curbside pickup? How do I enable delivery? I mean, there's a host of brands and retailers all across the globe that have had to really change the way they do in-store shopping, like when everyone's closed for 3 months during COVID, or maybe it's open back up, but people aren't comfortable shopping again. So now I have to do curbside. There's a lot of companies that did not have a true curbside strategy that had to come up with one. And now that, volume is starting to come back to the stores, they've had to figure out, how do I make this more effective? How do I make it more economical for everybody? The classic equation is always more work required of a retailer and not more revenue, which is kind of the online grocery model. And those are all things that we help. And part of that is how we're, redefining the space.
Interesting. Yeah. I think it's, you had an interesting point there about how, for 3 months when everybody's closed during COVID, it's really kind of changed the way that we have to operate and also, just consumer behavior in general. So it's pretty interesting to see how that's kind of shifted and probably accelerated a lot of companies' plans in that aspect as well. So, as we look at, micro-fulfillment, I think one of the other, key things you said is that, we would take existing buildings and, we may be busting at the seams, like you said, but we're able to kind of redefine that space and utilize it more. So, in that example, you're using kind of an older warehouse, right? But when we look at micro-fulfillment, we're looking at kind of smaller spaces, more like in urban areas, more highly populated areas where, you're trying to get closer to the customer and maybe have like same-day delivery or something of that nature. So how are you seeing where, AutoStore can start to fit into like these back rooms of retailers or in the back of a grocery store? How flexible is the solution in that sense? And do you see, I guess is a two-part question. So, and how do you see that redefining the way retail space is? Like, do you see the back room becoming larger and kind of the sales force smaller? Or are you able to kind of keep the balance with the flexibility of the solution?
I think the short answer for that is both. If you look at geographically as well as based on and independently the brand, they have very different strategies in how they want to serve their customer, how they want to adapt to the changing landscape of who their customer is, whether they're trying to go after new customers or adapt to the ones that they already have. So all of that's possible. And, we've got some companies that we're working with that are, really focused on, in the grocery sector as an example, still about 85 to 90% of grocery sales happen in a traditional environment where you and I walk up and down the aisles and we shop groceries for ourselves and for our family. It's still the lion's share of, the industry. So the question becomes, how do I serve this growing online community? And there's a lot of conversation around it, but more importantly, what are the domino effects? And the biggest domino effect is twofold. One, you're not making as much revenue or essentially enough margin because the sales are the same and the margin associated because you have extra work that your team members are doing by literally shopping the orders. You're making less money. And grocery, as a universal fact, is a razor-thin margin business to begin with. So that in itself is very, very challenging. But on the other side of the coin, you have a scenario where you've got grocers that need to have the strategy associated with what they're going to do with their existing customers. So if you've got all these people that are employees and associates walking up and down the aisle shopping, what kind of customer experience is that for 85% of your base?
Right.
And as that 85% turns into 80 because the 15% shoppers turns into 20 for the online model, maybe the reason that some of those 85% of your customers came to your store, maybe those reasons aren't there anymore. And I think that's the two major issues that are overlooked. There's certainly a lot of marketing and there's a lot of gloss around micro-fulfillment and strategies and all this fun stuff, which keeps all of us busy. But at the end of the day, I think we need to keep it very simple and talk about core values and why we're all in business. And we want to serve the customer. And that, I think, is often forgotten or diluted with all kinds of extra noise.
Yeah. Interesting perspective. I think you have an interesting point because I think that, even myself being a younger person, I never really looked into like getting any type of grocery fulfillment in terms of delivery or anything like that until COVID. So like I think your point about the majority of people are still going to the grocery stores is valid, and I guess I'm an example of that. Now, I'll never go back now, but yeah.
Exactly. You'll never go back. But think about how many people, when you were shopping, how often did you see what I call, quote unquote, the green shirts, whether they worked for a third party or they worked for the retailer that you were shopping.
Right.
If there's one or two in the aisle, I don't know that I want to go down that aisle. Maybe it's crowded. Some people have COVID fears, so they're not going to go down a crowded aisle in the first place. So
yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of those things that certain retailers in certain geographies said that their shoppers sometimes felt, even though it wasn't the reality, it was what they felt, they were outnumbered by the in-store shoppers from
Yeah.
the valet shoppers. So I think that's a huge perspective that that needs to be brought up. And you talk about the format. So I think there's a real group of first wave grocers that are looking at micro-fulfillment as standalone facilities, whether they have one, an empty facility that's an abandoned store that, as a part of a remodel moving down the street. That has been done and publicized. And I also think that 10,000 square feet attached to an existing store, where they've got potentially a larger back room or a ware room, or even the adjacent property or tenant in a strip is moving out. So I think all of those things are very viable. Obviously, as I said earlier, the closer you are, the lower the logistics costs, the more cost effective it is. So in short, without any data, a micro fulfillment center is always going to be more profitable than a dark store. But the difference is that a dark store is going to serve more orders, more grocers in a hub and spoke environment. You can still have a hub and spoke environment with micro fulfillment, but micro fulfillment is going to address a smaller percentage of your total volume, and it will, as a result, cost less and be smaller. And if all these things could cost effectively be handled with the demand from consumers, the supply of the associates doing the work, and most importantly, the delivery availability of or availability altogether of people actually shopping and having a pickup window. So if you look at like the United Kingdom right now, and even for the last 9 months, there was a tech guy that built his own app that helped consumers in the UK identify which grocer across all the brands who had a delivery window that you could actually sign up for.
Oh, wow.
That's how bad it was. And the backlog was weeks. So in that environment, you've got to understand that, yes, customer service is essential. Yes, you've got to make money or the lights will go off. But if you don't have enough capacity for your customers, they're going to go elsewhere. And that's very dangerous if it's not addressed properly. And those are just some of the reasons why grocers are talking to us, and the same reason that retailers are trying to figure out their buy online, pick up in store model.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point because, if you look at grocery, it's not necessarily something you would wait for. You need food, right? So you're not going to wait, 2 weeks till there's a delivery. It's not like necessarily a specialized item in most cases. And I would say I definitely, as I was, starting my COVID grocery shopping journey, I definitely ran into that issue too. And I switched, a couple of different services until I found one that, could always deliver the same day. But yeah, it definitely kind of changed the way I looked at it a little bit. And I will say, like, one of my personal, I guess, hesitations to getting into that type of grocery shopping versus like the in-person grocery shopping was, I guess, the quality of, the food that I would get. Like, what's the, I guess there's like a certain, when you're looking at like produce and meats and things like that, there's a certain, I guess, need or want to be able to, touch it or check it and, have your own kind of personal quality check. So I'm curious, in the AutoStore system, right? Because it's storing all these like cubbies of food, I imagine, in a grocery application. How do you make sure that like the food is rotating properly, and if it's things are spoilable, that they're not spoiling, and then it's still remaining fresh.
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, I mean that's essential, because if that's not at least the same, if not more improved, of a better experience as a shopper, no one's going to do it.
Right.
So that's essential. And to your point, that's why that's why a lot of people still like to shop their own groceries, because they want to make sure that their pear is the right kind of ripe for them. No one hates avocados that are rock hard when you're trying to have taco night.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just awful. So in that environment, I totally agree with you. And that is where we find probably one of the greatest benefits that is not ever going to make it in our return on investment calculation or internal rate of return, but it's the heightened customer experience. So if you've ever wanted to learn how to pick out a ripe watermelon, there's a few ways you can do it. You can Google it. You can ask your produce manager in the grocery store. And these guys or gals live with produce, so they obviously know exactly how to do it. And we have a very similar example in scenario when we have micro-fulfillment. So you've got people that are literally picking groceries all day long. And in the environment that they're doing the produce, they have a good feel and a good eye and a trained eye for what a ripe pear looks like, how a avocado is supposed to feel. And the AutoStore is going to cycle the inventory of whatever product it is appropriately, so that if a avocado ripe is ordered or an avocado hard is ordered, which are two very different SKUs, based on when you want them, the same way that bananas, if you want brown bananas or you want yellow bananas with no brown on them at all, those are two very different items. Now they're still the same SKU, but there's attributes that we have built into the experience to make sure that you get what you want. Because sometimes you want to make banana bread, they've got to be ripe. You can't wait 4 days for them to turn.
Yeah.
And those kinds of experiences and that kind of consistency, enables grocers to have more training for the team members to ultimately, improve the process. So rather than having, third parties that are, kind of jack of all trades, they have to do delivery, they have to do the picking, all of it. It's a really, it's a really convoluted piece, and you don't have a lot of consistency. Where on the AutoStore side with the automation, we've got consistency, and we've got team members that are highly trained, knowing exactly what to pick, when to pick, and to maximizing that customer experience.
Interesting. Yeah, I was curious about that, because it's like a very qualitative thing versus a quantitative thing, right? And like you said, some people, it's like, oh, I just want a certain amount of brown spots on my banana. So it's a little tricky, but it sounds like, I guess, the system itself, the AutoStore, is kind of allowing for the proper rotation and definitely providing the people with the right thing to pick. So I imagine the model, or at least the model that you advise these grocery stores to use, is to have these people that, I guess, would normally work in a produce section be picking from the AutoStore as well, right?
I think part of it is just proper training.
Right.
And, this is not a warehouse model where you're using temporary labor.
Yeah.
I mean, this is to enable the associate to do work that is going to directly impact and put a smile on these families' face. If you have, the right product and it's, correct, that's a positive customer experience. And oftentimes it's about minimizing or, enabling the right inventory at the right time, and making sure that, from a quality perspective, if you do have, call it a bad apple, that is literally an apple, that it stops at the fulfillment center and does not get to the customer's doorstep. So it's those types of experiences that can be stopped. And by using proper rotation and proper software that manages the entire micro-fulfillment center, you then have, a very limited number of, out of stocks, as well as inventory that is, outdated. So it's the big push on food waste. There's lots of documentaries on all of those things, and having a centralized, localized inventory really cleans a lot of that up.
Right. Yeah. I imagine, because it's easy. I can imagine I've never worked in a grocery store, but I can imagine it's easy to kind of maybe pull out the newest box first into the oldest if you don't have proper setup. So having, like the AutoStore be able to do that for you automatically is, I'm sure, helps with that food waste that you're referring to, which is great for the environment and sustainability overall. So I'm curious, we focused a lot on talking about grocery here, but I'm curious, what other types of, I guess, retail or like micro-fulfillment models are you guys working on, or that you kind of have envisioned within the AutoStore kind of future, I guess?
Yeah. So, we look at, I'll look back over the last 11 months, and, if you look at some of the big box home improvement stores, the Home Depot, the Lowe's, and Menards, those companies have, they're almost all the same as far as the layouts. You walk in and one side and you walk out the other. And the area in between those two is what is generally called the seasonal pad. And the seasonal pad changes every season, from Christmas items to lawn furniture, you name it. Every season it just kind of turns over. Well, during the middle of COVID, products sold out so quickly because everyone wanted to improve their home, which is good for those companies.
Yeah.
But what happened as a result is people, were experiencing, rationing and limiting on how many people can be in the store at once, which was a really poor experience. So they really opened up their online. They said, we'll shop for you. We'll run it out to your car, have access to more inventory, get it delivered to the store, pick it up there. So what they had to do is their pickup volume went through the roof. And by through the roof, I literally mean exponential to, 5x plus. Wow. So if you look at the pickup of most of those stores today, it's behind the customer service desk. It might be 20 by 15 feet today.
Yeah, it's tight. Yeah.
Really small. But if you go down and look at what they had to do in the middle of COVID, which is probably what they're going to have to end up doing during the holiday season now, is they had to have all these temporary staging racks set up that was 5 times larger of an area because of all the people that ordered stuff online. And they came and picked it up in a couple of hours to a couple of days, but not immediately. And it took up all the space. So here's the challenge. They are now taking revenue generating sales floor and turning it into a non-revenue generating space. That is extremely expensive in the equation of retail.
Right.
So those kinds of scenarios are part of the new reality, and how we can help companies to save the space that they have. And by doing a 4 to 5x reduction of space, we can shrink all of that inventory into a very small cube of about probably 20 feet by 20 feet. Having instant access to all the products, everything is inventoried and serialized, whether it's inventory to be picked later, or if it's orders that have already been placed, whether they came from the DC or whether they came from an associate walking in the store and picking them up. Once those orders are complete, they can all go in the AutoStore, and the customer can pick up their product as soon as they get to the parking lot. So that's probably the newest way that AutoStore is helping companies to enable their pickup in a more profitable way, maximizing their store footprint so they can focus the store on making revenue, which is what they're there for in the first place.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. And I'm curious, do you, I mean, maybe you personally or AutoStore in general, do you guys see the, I guess, obviously there's a big, there's a big swath now of like vacant, like mini malls and strip malls and even bigger malls, right? And department stores that have closed and all these different things. So, I mean, do you guys see that eventually these vacant retail places are going to essentially become fulfillment centers or like micro-fulfillment centers? Do you see that happening and, utilizing solutions like the AutoStore? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you'll see some retailers deploy an AutoStore in the store or in the corner of a store. So I think that is a model.
Okay.
Separately, I see certain retailers identify, underutilized or underpriced real estate. And that comes in a couple different ways. So I'll kind of break that into a couple different scenarios. So, I think about, Rite Aid, I think Toys R Us, even I'll go as back as far as like Circuit City. Some of those places, they're not in what they call Class A malls. And I think that is a great scenario.
Right.
As those are untapped and sit vacant, that's perfect.
Yeah.
I see a lot of that coming in the future because generally the real estate was good and the location's great, but the retail model just died. So I think that's a new way that can, micro-fulfillment can move into. Now, separately, I look at, the malls of the world. The JCPenney anchored malls, the Sears anchored malls, those types of malls. So I think, the ones that are doing well will continue to do well. The ones that aren't doing well will either be renegotiated, or what I'm finding more often than not is that the contracts that they wrote were so strong 50 years ago, 30 years ago, that they gave up too much power in exchange for too much revenue. And if you're a developer at the time, it sounded like it was great.
Right.
Yes, I can let Sears or whoever say what I can do in this property because they're going to be here forever. They just spent millions upon millions of dollars. Yeah. But in reality, as those Sears, could start to, not make as much money for the mall and for themselves, that really changed the equation. A lot of these landowners are not as open to do whatever they want. So if you look at a lot of the contracts and you look at a lot of the details, they don't have the power to put, let's just call it an Amazon style fulfillment center in an empty Sears, because that's not how the contracts are made. And in order to get the contracts changed, everyone and their mother in the mall has to agree.
Right.
And that just doesn't work. So it's a really interesting paradigm. I'd love to see that get resolved.
Yeah.
I think it could happen, but I think there's a lot more red tape involved than most people think as an outsider.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Actually, I never, thought about that in that terms. I mean, it's a shame, I guess, because you look at all these. I know, like by where I live, there's a mall, a complete mall is just totally empty, vacant for multiple years now, and it's kind of like, why you wish that they would just do something with it because it's just dying there, basically. But yeah, it's interesting that you say that in terms of the red tape. I never thought about that. So it'd be interesting to see how, I guess, as things progress in terms of the retail environment, how that will begin to, because I'm sure at some point it's gonna break, and I'm sure it'll be interesting to see how that kind of unfolds and how people start to utilize that space in a more creative way, I guess, for today's environment and today's retail landscape. And I'm sure sure AutoStore will be, one of the ones to kind of lead the charge to utilize that space in an efficient way, as well. So, what else do you think is in store for the future of AutoStore?
Well, I think, at a, 10-year view, I see a couple of things happen. I think they'll become much more household than industrial. So we actually have, which is pretty cool, we have one of the founders' family members has an AutoStore in his house. It's literally in his basement.
Wow.
So he stores all his Christmas stuff in it and his clothes and those types of things. So I think that's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's commercially viable yet, but I think that could be really cool. And
I was just thinking of like an AutoStore spice rack.
Yeah.
Like
I mean, think about it. They had
those
those rotary tie carousels.
Yeah.
Many, many years ago. Can't say that I ever owned one, but they were cool in their day.
Yeah.
And I think that could be really interesting. But I also see AutoStore getting more customer friendly. So call it touchless curbside pickup.
Yeah.
Without an associate. I think that's not too far off.
Yeah. I think I saw the picture on the website, right? It looks like it's like a store, and then the AutoStore is like inside. It's almost like two ATM windows. It looks like it would drop the order like right there for pickup.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple ways to look at it. You could look at the ATM with the little vacuum tube that goes up and over.
Yeah.
Some newer version of that, or some Walgreens and CVS has that, that pharmacy drive-through where, they slide it out, and your pharmacy items are in the little drawer, and when they're done, they slide it back in. So, those are things that have been around for many, many years that are ripe for modernization.
Yeah.
And, one of the challenges that I see with delivery lockers, which is part of the industry now, and they're starting to get a little more traction, is they're too much of an off, a one-off associated with how people could store their products or where it would be stored for a temporary time frame. And I see the AutoStore, expanding its reach to have really delivering that product all the way to the customer. And there's some really futuristic stuff, globally, that I think is really interesting. So I'd love to have this conversation again in 5 years and see what all has come to fruition.
Yeah, me too. So let's plan on it.
Definitely.
All right. So thank you, Andrew, for talking to me today and kind of talking about this concept. I think it's really interesting, and the more I learn about AutoStore, the more I'm intrigued to see how many other applications it can come up with, and I think it's pretty cool. Somebody has it in their basement. So how can people find out more information about AutoStore?
Yeah, I'm all over LinkedIn. Our website, autostoresystems.com, and my email is andrew.benzinger@autostoresystems.com as well. And I certainly appreciate the opportunity. And I'll leave you with something that you said in the very, very beginning that has resonated with me, and I'm kind of kicking myself for not saying it earlier. But you mentioned that you like to go to a grocery store and shop your own products in the produce and the meat area because you've got a discerning eye. You want to pick out your steak. You want to pick out your produce, right? So what we're calling the Omni Store, and hopefully you can put a link into your viewership afterwards, is a scenario where the center of a store today can be replaced entirely by automation. In a really cost-efficient way, the automation will be front and center of the store as a showpiece, as opposed to hidden in the back of a store, in the back of a wareroom. And in that environment, we have all the cereal and granola and chips and soda and all those types of things are in the automation, enabling you to do a couple of things. On the outer edge is where you're going to have all your produce, the sushi, fresh bakery items, all your refrigerated dairy, and the butcher area as well. So you have a couple options. You can shop your entire order in 15 minutes by utilizing the AutoStore.
Yeah.
The AutoStore can have your products delivered. We can do a blend of both, which is my personal favorite because I got to pick up 15 items for my wife and kids, but I'd like a nice piece of fish for dinner tonight. And as a result, I can do all of that in 10 minutes or less.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got some options whether my 15 items can be delivered to me in 1 or 2 bins already, or I can, on the fly with no heads up and no notice, I can have 15 bins delivered to me, and I grab the products instead of walking up and down the aisles. So one of the real paradigms, to your point that you made earlier, is you like going to the grocery store, or at least you did, and you like shopping for some products, but not all of them, like I do. And that's what we believe is, the future of grocery. And I truly believe in the next 5 to 10 years, you'll see a large number of grocery stores look just like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so as well. I think that's a really good concept that you kind of portrayed there. And I think the AutoStore itself, I mean, it's a beautiful design. So I mean, having it as a centerpiece, I mean, I think is also very interesting and very intriguing. It's not so industrial, I would say. It's like really, really well designed, and the coloring and stuff as well is really cool. So I think that's a really cool concept, and I'd love to see that happen. So hopefully in 5 years when we talk again, I'll be shopping at one of those, because I'll be really excited to see AutoStore and also pick out my own steak, right?
Awesome. Thank you. I certainly appreciate the opportunity. Definitely.
Yeah, and we'll put all that information on the newwarehouse.com as well, so you can check out more information about AutoStore and get in touch with Andrew. So Andrew, thank you again for coming on the show.
Great. Thanks, Kevin.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the New Warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the New Warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.